Good day, my name is Keith Feely. There's my email address, there's the one I use on Twitter, which I use all the time. Today's focus, Keith's talk, is on developing effective independent learning. This time I'm focusing upon home learning, which, since this is occurring during the coronavirus crisis, has become very, very pertinent. But I'm going to go right back to when I started focusing upon home learning, which was in 1974 when I began teaching. I was fortunate enough to go back to my old school in Rockford, and I was a PE teacher and science teacher at the time, and basically I wanted really to focus upon helping the kids who were like me, came from a disadvantaged background, and wanted to find out what they most needed to achieve good health, well-being and life chances. And most importantly, since I was teaching them, how I could most effectively help them to achieve this. And consequently, one of the things that I was conscious of was I needed to try to find a way, but I was only with them a very short period of time, each day, each week, each year for their life. So therefore, Montessori for me reflects really what I was after. I wanted them to say, the children are now working as if I did not exist. I was conscious that I learned a lot more away from school than I did in school. In fact, to be perfectly honest, I didn't learn a tremendous amount in school. I was a bit of a perishing nuisance. So consequently, I wanted to try to find a way that I could help people who perhaps like myself found the classroom a little bit more of a distraction than a help. And the 5 learning requirements which I researched and discovered by 1978 were absolutely crucial in this. I wasn't really perhaps motivated so much in most lessons, but I was in PE. So consequently I was very aware that unless a child was motivated, or a person's motivated, they're going to struggle. The classroom was a big distraction for me, and I didn't have good concentration in the classroom. I was actually very good when I was away from it and I was on my own, but I'm afraid when I was in the environment, which is the classroom environment, I was usually more intent on trying to distract others and very easily distracted myself. Consequently, my PE background gave me a very good steer into the fact that if I'm to try to improve, I've got to take it small step at a time. And therefore, one of the crucial things for me was always trying to break down what the learning involved into relatively small steps so that they could feel each time they were making progress. In PE, that's obviously fundamental, but it's true in anything we're trying to learn. Therefore, armed with those 5 learning requirements, I became aware, perhaps a little bit later on in the 80s, that people who were effective learners were comfortable with change and were actually able to learn new things really as they came along. And in the present day, that's very important. Therefore, my focus was trying to develop effective learners who did not have to rely upon somebody else. Because I've met many people who are all right when somebody's teaching them, but they need to be able to learn because there's so much out there that you can learn from, particularly in the days of the greatest library in the world from Google and internet. And therefore the practice of what we're doing needs to become something that they want to do rather than feel forced to do. Therefore, what I study all the time are people who I consider to be effective learners, and these are the things that I look for when I'm trying to see if I consider them to be effective learners. Now, one of the crucial things for me to bear in mind was this was a big struggle in the late 70s for me. It still is, to be perfectly honest, because my lessons were being observed by lots of people. I was team teaching a lot of the time in PE, and in science we used to have open classrooms. People would be coming in and out all the time, never ever shut my door. People would ask me what I was trying to do, and I would explain to them I was trying to focus upon learning skills, and it was going to be a long old haul. Therefore I invented a phrase which you may have heard since then quite a bit. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Because I wasn't really concerned about what they were going to do in the test next week or the exam in a week or a year's time, but much more in how they were going to cope with as an adult. Consequently, what I then needed to do was to try to find ways in which I could identify the key factors that's going to make a difference in their lives. And there you will see, I've tried to break it down into key points there, that perhaps if you're trying to do this with your children, whether they are your own children or you're in a classroom, then you're going to need to consider each of those factors. The bottom two became very, very important because I needed to explain to people, the students and the parents, and some of the staff, to be perfectly honest, that what was going on and how we were going to do this. And also then I focused upon experimenting a great deal and to what would be very good resources for them to be learning. By the early 80s, my children never ever took any notes at all. They always had printed notes, very good quality notes, because I couldn't write as a child very well, and therefore I felt it was unfair to have the kids write down and copy their own notes, because often they couldn't be read. And I used to spend a lot of time trying to find very good quality textbooks and see if we could afford to buy them. But one of the crucial things was for me was to, whenever I was teaching a lesson, to start off to get them motivated to understand what it was about. Science was the subject. I became head of department in first of all, and consequently I tried to make sure that people understood why science was so brilliant, and I still think it is, because it's the careful study of anything, and it does so that we can understand it. In recent times, people have been suddenly interested in health and well-being and science because of the problems we've got with viruses, the coronavirus at the moment in time. And that's where perhaps you can see the example is very pertinent, because it's the knowledge and skills that we've got that will help us make good decisions, and having good healthy decisions is going to be crucial for our health and well-being and many others at this moment in time. So consequently, what I then made sure I did was to focus upon getting good resources and training them how to use them. And the first one that I did was in the early 80s to focus upon how they could use learning from videos is the most effective way. I realised that in the 60s I became good at learning from the television, and by the early 80s we actually had videos available. It was still crude by today's standards, but meant that what I was trying to do was experiment in a way where we had a teacher who I could observe, because that was on the screen, and I could watch what people were doing. Now this took a lot of experimentation, so you shouldn't be lulled into false sense of security. It took a lot of time. I used to study and research many videos. People who know me know that. But I, in the end, found a technique which was quite effective. Basically, I would be able to give them a set of questions based upon the video, and I would give them the questions before they watched the video. See how much they can answer without watching the video. Often they would do it in pairs. I would give them the answers, and I'll show you a sheet here. There's an example. The video is going to be on Earth and Beyond. There's 20 questions there. There's your 20 answers. You've got to try to put them in a box. When the video starts, then I watch to see, they do it in pencil, they can rub them out, move them around, or tick them if they think they've got it right. At the end of it, then they and the class will give out the answers, then they'll see how many they've got correct. I'm watching them all the time. I don't have to do the teaching, so I can study them and I can see how much they're helping each other, how much they're understanding, how much they're learning. I'm watching them all the time. Another resource, which again was invented 150 years ago, are jigsaws. They were actually invented to try to help people understand a bit more about the world, and they were done on atlases. But I realised that I could do this and adapt this into any subject I was teaching or anything I was teaching. The MC stands for matching clothes, because I got the idea of a clothes procedure where words are missed out and you've got to try to put the words in. But basically what I did, create jigsaws from key pieces of information. So I would pick up various books like this, and then I would go through the book, and then I would, as you can possibly see here, remove key words. Now the next slide shows you an example of this, and notice that I coordinated it all. So this is the solar system, Earth and Beyond was your previous one, and you will see that I've removed 10 key words. They would be in a box with the 10 words there, And the pair, again I would choose the pairs carefully, they would be trying to find where they've got to go. And in order to do so they had to study the information, clues, things perhaps easier ones than others, like you do in jigsaws, and then narrow it down. Then we would go through it and they would go, oh yes, that's, of course, most of them actually were quite good in the end once they realised how they were having to be trained to think in a scientific, rational, logical way. The third way also was focusing upon how they could learn key facts. In science and in some subjects, maths is actually surprisingly a lot of facts, but how they could learn the most effective. And again, I was fortunate in the early 80s because Trivial Pursuit came out. And I thought, this is a great idea. You have a question on one side, you have the answer on the other. So I adapted this and started to make out quiz cards, that's what we called them, and we experimented immensely. And of course, what I then realised, well, if I actually used what I was already doing, the questions from Earth and beyond, there's the 20 questions we had at the start, there are the 20 answers. Basically, if I planned them out carefully, put them on a card, I would have the questions on one side, the answers on the other. So they could test themselves, or they're still in their pairs, they would test each other and they would see how they were doing and how much they were learning. It meant that basically in the lesson they were being trained to do something which basically they were able to understand. They were trying to work out, and you'll see I later gave this the term S.U.P.E.R.Learning because of the acronym that you've got on the side there, and it meant that these children were being developed in understanding how to learn things effectively. That was my main concern, remember. I want to develop effective learners. We just happen to be using science or maths or whatever the subject might be, and it may be the particular topics. And you will see that by doing this technique, it meant by the latter part of the 80s, say, I realised that I'd hit upon a way of helping these children learn not just in class, but at home. So then I focused upon making sure that I was creating packs and I was getting them to have resources to take home, and you'll see there's a letter there, you can enlarge that at another time, and basically the packs had the resources that I've been dealing with. In those days, of course, we didn't have the internet, so I had to put all the stuff that we are dealing with on DVDs. And put them in booklets. So there's a booklet, and you've got here the booklet which basically is Key Stage 3. I did it for Key Stage 2, and you'll see I started using BBC because BBC in the 90s started to get their act together and produce good resources and good videos, and therefore I could do it for Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And I broke it down for each of the subjects, and goodness knows how many different subjects I managed to prepare that for GCSE. Both my daughters are now teachers, and at the time they found these resources incredibly invaluable when they were doing their GCSEs. So one of the crucial things for me is to point out that now, this is 30 years later almost, we now have the facility to put this into action a great deal of the time. One of the sadnesses for me is now that we have the internet and we now have all the potential to do all this, unfortunately for the last 5 years Learning Zone, BBC Learning Zone, hasn't been in existence, which is where I used to get many of the videos and a lot of the resources. But perhaps they'll start up again soon. Well, that's been a fairly quick whistle-stop tour. Don't forget, there's my email address and Twitter. If you want to contact me, please do, and I'll only be too pleased to try to help you further. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you watch again soon.